Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Learn With Me. I'm Deborah Hanson, and today we're going to be looking at AP Human Geography, Unit 2, Population and Migration Patterns and Processes. We're going to break all that down for you to help you do well on the exam. So we're going to start today by looking at 2.1, Population Distribution. I'm going to talk about the key terms, the CED questions, everything you need to know to be successful on the Unit 2 test or the actual AP exam. Let's break those all down. So on the slide here, you're going to see a whole bunch of key terms, and really the key to the 5 in AP Hug is definitely knowing your key terms. You absolutely have to know the definition and an example of each of the words that are important so that you can use them in an FRQ, or you can actually be able to understand them in an MCQ. So it's really, really important to know your key terms. How you decide to do that is up to you. Flashcards, Quizlets, whatever you decide, as long as you remember them. It's going to make a huge difference on exam day. So let's get started. So as I mentioned, key terms are important. I'm going to make another video also with all those key terms and examples and definitions. But what is also important is the CED questions, right? The College Board puts out these questions, and this is what they're going to base the exam on, is all these questions. So it's really important to be able to understand how to break down each of the questions that they're posing in the CED. So today we're going to specifically look at the 3 for 2.1. Identify the factors that influence the distribution of human populations at different scales. Define methods geographers use to calculate population density, and explain the differences between and the impact of methods used to calculate population density. I'm going to break down all the essential knowledge you need to be able to answer those 3 questions. Okay, so before we start talking about population distribution, I just want to thank everybody who's already subscribed and liked the channel, and everything you guys are doing is really helping. My numbers are going up, which I really appreciate. Hopefully you're finding these helpful. If you are, give me that little like or just leave me a comment. I answer everyone. If you have questions or anything, please do that for me below. And if you can subscribe, that really helps me a lot. So let's get started. Let's talk about population distribution. Basically, where people live and how they're spread out on the Earth's surface. This isn't random. Some areas are packed with people while others hardly have anyone. Take China, for example. Most of the population is clustered in the east, and that's where the big cities are. Fertile land, favorable climates, all of that. But head to the western interior and it's a totally different story with way fewer people, more open space, and tougher environments. This kind of pattern shows up all over the world. Urban areas are usually higher in population concentration, while rural areas are more spread out. So here's a quick trick to remember this, okay? We think about where people live and how they're arranged. Are they clustered together? Are they spread out? Or maybe they're in a long line along a river or a road. And we learned these terms in Unit 1, didn't we? So if you remember some of those CED questions we just talked about, population density is important. So let's talk about that now. This is all about how many people live in a specific area. It's usually measured as people per square kilometer or mile, and it's basically telling us how crowded a place is. So for example, Bangladesh has a very high population density, tons of people living in a relatively small space. On the flip side, Canada has a low population density. There's a lot of land, but not that many people that are spread out across it. So here's a quick trick to remember this. Density equals number of people divided by area. The bigger the number, the more crowded it is. Now let's break down the physical factors that shape where people live. First up, climate. People usually prefer moderate, mid-latitude climates. The kind that's good for farming and comfortable to live in. On the other hand, extreme climates, too hot or too cold or too dry, tend to have fewer people. Now, I live in Dubai. It's really, really hot here in the summertime. And then I also lived in Canada, which was really, really cold. But we know we make it work. Next is water access. Rivers, lakes, and coasts attract people because they provide fresh water, transportation, and fertile land. So basically everything you need to build communities. And then finally, geography. Fertile valleys and flat, low-lying lands support these dense populations, while mountains and harsh terrain make it harder to live. So those areas stay more sparsely populated. Here's the key idea. People tend to settle where resources are available. The climate is moderate and the land is easy to use. Now let's look at the human factors that shape where people live, because it's not just about land and climate anymore. First up, safety and stability. People are naturally drawn to areas with political stability, security, and peace. Places with conflict or instability usually have lower population densities because people move away. Next up, economic opportunities, jobs, industries, and better living standards pull people towards cities and developed regions. This is one of the main reasons why urban areas around the world keep growing. And then finally, social factors. Things like family ties, cultural connections, and communities make people choose certain areas over others. Sometimes it's not about resources, it's just about belonging. The key takeaway: in modern times, human choices like jobs, safety, and community are just as important as the physical factors in shaping population patterns. So again, if you remember those CED questions, one of them was talking about scales of analysis. So let's talk about scales of analysis and basically the different geographic levels we can use to study patterns and processes. So each scale, whether it be local, regional, or global, gives us different lenses for understanding how physical factors shape human activity. At the local scale, it's about smaller, detailed influences like soil quality and microclimates, which can affect things like farming, settlement patterns, and even the kinds of crops people can grow. Zoom out to the regional scale, and bigger features like mountains and rivers start to matter. They shape trade routes, transportation, and population distribution across larger areas. And at the global scale, we're looking at the big picture, things like climate change and resource distribution, which affect international relationships, migration, and geopolitics. Here's the key idea. The scale that you choose changes what you see, and different physical factors stand out at each level. So I know that I'm talking a lot, but if you want to see the full slideshow and you want the workbook that goes along with all of my discussions and slides, because I do tend to try to teach it more than just show you a bunch of words on a slide. So you can do that. You'll find the link below to my Teacher Pay Teacher store where you can get all of that. The slideshow, the workbook, the answer key, everything you need. Okay, so we're now going to look at the scales of analysis, but through the lens of human factors, things like culture, economics, politics, and social dynamics. At the local scale, we zoom in on communities and neighborhoods, and here we can see how culture and society shape daily life. They shape our traditions, our local networks, and the way people interact with smaller spaces. At the regional scale, it's about economic forces. Industry, trade, and infrastructure help shape regional identity and sometimes create inequalities between different areas. At the global scale, we're dealing with the big players, geopolitics, international relations, and the global economy. This scale reveals how human factors interact across borders, influencing migration, trade, and political alliances. So remember, each scale reveals a different human pattern and process, from the culture of a neighborhood to the politics that shape the entire world. So now we're going to break down the three main types of population density. These are the ones you need to know for the AP exam. They're super important to understand how people use the land and resources. We start with arithmetic density. So this is the total population divided by the total land area. It tells us the average number of people living on each unit of land, like per square mile or square meter, however you're calculating that. For example, the United States has about 84 people per square mile on average. But keep in mind, this doesn't tell us where people actually are living. It's just an overall average. So a big country with lots of empty space can still have a moderate arithmetic density. The next one is physiological density. This is the total population divided by arable land. And arable land means that's land that's good for farming. This measure shows how pressure is being placed on the land to produce enough food. If a country has very little arable land but a large population, its physiological density will be very high. This is common in places like Egypt, where most people live near the Nile because that's where the fertile land is. The last one is agricultural density. So this is the number of farmers divided by the amount of arable land. So this tells us how many people are actively working the land. So listen to this now. A low agricultural density usually means the country has advanced farming technology, so fewer farmers are needed to work the land. And this is typically in developed countries. A high agriculture density means that more farmers are needed, which is common in less developed regions where farming is more labor intensive. So let's just do a little quick recap of that. Arithmetic equals people per total land, so that's the average population spread. Physiological, people per arable land, so food pressure. And agriculture, farmers per arable land because it's farming efficiency. So these three densities together give you a full picture of how population relates to its land, not just where people live, but how they survive. Okay, so back to those CED questions we talked about, we're going to break down population pyramids, one of the most useful tools in human geography. A population pyramid is a graph that shows the age and gender distribution of a population, and it's usually drawn on a horizontal bar chart. Males are shown on the left and females are shown on the right. Each bar represents an age group stacked from the youngest at the bottom to the oldest at the top. So, what are the shapes and what do they mean? The shape of the pyramid tells us a story. A wide base and a narrow top means the country has a young population with a high birth rate and likely rapid growth. Think of developing countries with lots of kids. A more rectangular shape means the population is evenly spread out across the age groups, showing stable growth. This is common in developed countries. A narrow base can indicate declining birth rates, often seen in aging or shrinking populations. So, why does this matter? Population pyramids are more than just cool graphs. They're powerful planning tools. They help demographers, and policymakers understand current trends and prepare for the future that they need. So, a large young population might mean more schools and jobs are needed. A very elderly population might signal the need for more healthcare or pension systems. So just remember this. The shape equals a story. The shape of the population pyramid reveals how a population is growing, aging, or shrinking, and it helps predict what challenges or opportunities are going to come next. So populations never stay the same. They change over time depending on birth rates and death rates. To understand these changes, geographers use the demographic transition model, or the DTM. You're going to hear a lot about this in this unit. This is a 5-stage framework that shows how populations evolve as countries modernize. At the start, in stage 1, both birth and death rates are high, so population growth is basically flat. As a country develops, improving education, healthcare, and food supply, death rates drop first, and then later birth rates decline as well. So by the time a country reaches stage 4 or 5, and the birth and death rates are low, and in some cases, the population may even shrink. So if you know the 5 stages of the DMT, you can explain population trends over time, from rapid growth in early stages to stable or negative growth in the later ones. So this is just a really quick introduction because we are going to talk a lot more about this, the DTM, in this unit. So don't worry if you don't really get it right now. We're going to go into a lot more detail. So that's all the essential knowledge for those 3 CED questions we talked about at the beginning. Identify the factors that influence the distribution of human populations at different scales, define methods geographers use to calculate population density, and explain the differences between and the impact of methods used to calculate population density. So those are the CED questions. Hopefully you have a better understanding of those now. If you do, hit that like and subscribe button for me, or if you leave me a comment, that's even better. I promise I will answer you. I answer everybody. Hopefully you found this helpful today. Thank you so much for listening. See you next time.